What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I am very excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking all about composting. I'm here with my compost pile, and to be honest, it looks great. It's been sitting here all summer long, breaking down, and it's just about ready to use on our garden. And so I'm very, very excited about it. But I wanted to answer the question that comes up in our inbox, and that's, Luke, I'd like to start composting, but I don't know what to begin with. I don't know if there's things that I should and shouldn't compost. I don't know if there's any special tricks or tips that you can give me to help me compost easier or to get started. And so I figured, you know what, that'd be a great topic for today's video. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is we're going to talk about kind of the do's and don'ts of composting when it pertains to the materials that you use. Now, there are a lot of things at our disposal to compost and turn into compost. And what you want to do is you want to first look at if it's organic or not. If it's anything that is synthetic or man-made, that is not going to break down to compost. You're talking rubbers, plastics, anything that's synthetic, that's oil-based product, things like that, you want to leave out of the compost pile. You know, I hear people say all the time, Luke, what about those newfangled chip bags that say they're biodegradable? Yes, those will break down, but we're talking over the course of years and years. If you throw them in your compost pile, they will not break down over the course of months. They're going to be over the course of years. And so, in my personal opinion, do not worry about throwing those in the compost pile, because you're not really going to see any net benefit. And if anything, you're going to be working around them for years before they start to break down. So just something to consider with stuff that you want to throw in the compost pile. Things like wood, things like grass clippings, anything that has that has organic compounds in it that can break down really readily and become soil are things that you want to focus on. Food scraps, animal manures, we'll talk about that one as well, but most animal manures, grass clippings, yard waste, things like that are wonderful options for you. So I'm going to talk about some specific materials here that are kind of do's and don'ts to composting, because I think it's really going to help you get started with composting. The first one would be, obvious ones like grass clippings. Now, the do to grass clippings is do compost grass clippings that are green or brown. Any type of grass clipping is going to be great. However, do not compost grass clippings that have their seed stalks. This is going to transmit a ton of weed seeds into your compost. And that's why I always recommend either mowing your lawn very frequently and keeping it well manicured so that you can continue to throw really good, clean grass clippings onto your compost pile. Or what you want to do is you want to come and you want to but you want to kind of chop off all those seed heads first, bag them up with like a bagger, get them out of your yard, and then come through and do a second cut that's a little more clean. That's going to remove a lot of those seed heads that could otherwise spread seed into your compost pile. So grass clippings, great option. Brown or green, all are going to be great. The green is going to provide nitrogen, the brown is going to provide carbon. Both are wonderful things to have in your compost, and both are essential to creating compost, but you just don't want those weed seeds. So keep that in mind. The next thing to compost that is very obvious are things like other yard waste, like leaves or trimmings from trees. Wonderful options. Anytime you have a leaf, this contains a lot of biomass that can break down and generate wonderful compost for your garden. But one of the mistakes I see people making with composting leaves is that they don't break them up. Now, leaves in a forest floor, they will stack. And when they stack, they mat together. And when they mat together, they reduce the amount of oxygen and air and water that can get in between these layers. And as you stack higher and higher and higher, you end up with a sandwiching effect that can take years to break down. I'm talking years. We've had old leaf piles at our old house, my parents' house, where I had my very first garden. And I went back there about 4 years ago. And it's been about 6 years since I've been there. Since I've had a garden there, about 6 years. And we had an old leaf pile, and I just was digging around there, just kind of seeing what was there, because I was going to apply some fresh compost from those piles to my mom's garden to get her garden ready for the spring. I was helping her out. And what I noticed is that the very center of the pile still had, believe it or not, uncomposted leaf matter. And that's because they sit there and they mat down and they create an anaerobic environment. Anaerobic means there's no oxygen. And so because it's void of oxygen, the breaking down process takes a long, long time. We're talking years, not months. And so the oxygenation of the pile is really what helps to create that breaking down process. It also allows water in there and really allows the insects and fungi and stuff to break down and start to work the leaf matter a lot better. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to throw whole leaves on. Leaves make wonderful options for composting, but make sure to mulch them up. Just run them over with a lawnmower first, really break them up. And what you want to do is you want to increase that surface area, because when you increase that surface area by breaking them, now there's a lot more room for air. And even if you smash them down and compact them, there's a lot more air gaps because you've increased that surface area. So that's leaves. Now with things like twigs and sticks and other trimmings around the house, those are wonderful options as well. They're wood, and wood breaks down and creates compost. But the larger the wood, the larger it's going to take to break down. Prime example, you see this right here? This was 2 years ago. I threw some sunflower stalks on the compost pile. And this sunflower stalk, or actually no, this is an okra stalk. So I threw some sunflower and okra stalks. The sunflowers I actually had to throw back on our other pile because they were nowhere near broken down, but these are okra stalks. And as you can see, this exoskeleton of an okra stalk, this is 2 years old, still very much unbroken down. And that's because had I taken them and mowed them over with a lawnmower, or kind of broken them up with some type of clippers or something like that, and I were to increase the surface area, just like leaves, it's going to help to break down that material. And that's just because really woody material is very dense, and it's also, when it's dense, it's just like having leaves really compacted close together. There's not a lot of oxygen in very densely packed material. So what you want to do is just break that up, and it helps to bring in more oxygen, which helps to break down faster. So as you can see, it takes a long time to break down whole materials, and so breaking them up is going to help. The next thing I want to talk about is food waste. Food waste is the next category that is a wonderful option to break down, but there are some do's and don'ts to that as well. Do use food waste like your fruit and vegetable scraps. Those ones, you can pretty much throw those in right whole, and they're going to break down very quickly. Things like corn husks, things like your vegetable peelings, or just scraps from the kitchen that are used from processing up the vegetables. Those are wonderful. What I would caution you on are things that are high in seeds. Now, if you have a lot of like whole tomatoes and stuff that go bad, whole tomatoes are going to cause a lot of volunteer plants. Now, you might not mind this, but as someone that has fought volunteer tomatoes for about 2 years now in one of our beds, I can tell you that it is very, very frustrating. It's something that definitely gets to be a little bit annoying, and something that can actually cause some competition issues with some of the other plants that you're trying to grow. So it can be an issue. So try to stay away from things that are high in seeds. Things like cucumbers are great as well. Cucumbers are wonderful. They break down, and the seeds are not very viable because they're picked young. So young cucumbers usually are not a problem. Things like cantaloupe, things like watermelon, those can have some viable seeds as well that can be a little bit of an annoyance. But all you have to do is just kind of hollow them out, discard the seeds, throw them in the trash, or save the seeds yourself, and then throw the rind and the flesh or whatever into your compost pile. And that's going to help to break down, create wonderful compost. It's also going to add a lot of moisture and hydration to the compost, which helps to break things down faster. But it's not going to have a lot of those weed seeds, or not weed seeds, but volunteer seeds that can grow like weeds. Another thing that you don't want to compost with your food scraps would be things like meats. Now, meats can invite rodents, other animals, dogs, and just other animals to your compost pile, which you do not want. You also can get a lot of bad bacteria that can come from things like meats and oils and stuff from the kitchen that you just don't want to have in your garden. A lot of the things like salmonella and a lot of those foodborne illnesses, they come from not broken down properly meat and dairies and fats. And so you want to keep those away from the garden. Other things you want to keep out of the garden are things that are high in salts. So if you just took like a bag of potato chips, you'd say, well, they are potatoes, yes, but they contain two things you don't want, and that is salt and oil. Salts and oils are two things that just don't belong in the garden. Salts will actually ruin the soil over time because they stay in the soil, they don't leave. And they prevent the plants from actually wicking water properly. They prevent the plants from uptaking nutrients properly. They really wreak havoc on the garden. So salts are a no-go, but also things like fats can be a big problem as well. So potato chips are kind of off limits. Even though they are a potato, they are a vegetable at one point, they've been treated with other processes that make them not good for the compost pile. Another thing that comes from the house that you probably have are pets. Now, when we're talking about pets, this falls into pet manure. We get asked all the time, Luke, should I compost my cat and dog poop, basically, manure? And the answer is no. They're far too close to humans to compost them safely. Now, you can break them down in other ways, but we're talking about a compost pile. There are other composting methods that exist out there, and you can do your research, that are safe for things like human manure and other mammals' manure. But in comparison to things like cows, sheep, goats, rabbits, other mammals, they're not quite the same. That's because they're far more carnivores than herbivores. And so on a plant-based diet, you're going to have a far safer compost coming from things like your other farm animals. Maybe not, you probably don't have a pet cow in the city, but just do not use things like dog and cat manure or dog and cat feces. And that's because they can spread a lot of harmful bacteria in your soil that you do not want. But with things like manures are wonderful options, provide a lot of nutrients to your soil, provide a lot of added, kind of oomph, or they give your soil they give your compost kind of a kickstart because of the high levels of nitrogen that the bacteria can feed off of. That's ultimately what you're doing in a compost pile, is you're fostering good bacteria, which help to break down the organic matter. And so that nitrogen actually will help to kind of kickstart the process. Other things from the kitchen that I just thought of that are wonderful and very high in nitrogen are coffee and tea scraps. Coffee and tea are very high in nitrogen, and so by throwing those in your compost pile as well, they can really do wonders for increasing the nitrogen and the aerobic activity within your compost pile. So those are some things that you want to do. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about are composting paper products. This is another thing that comes from the house. And paper products can be great in the compost pile, but like I said, I really want to caution you on how you process them. Now, if you take just a ton of whole sheets of newspaper and throw them in the compost pile, it's going to be the effect that leaves have. They're going to sandwich together. They're going to take a very long time to break down. And archaeologists have found pits, historic pits from the 50s and 20s that have old newspaper dumping spots. And you can still find sheets of newspaper from the 20s and 50s that are 60 to 80 years old, still not properly broken down, because it just creates this anaerobic environment that things don't break down. So you want to shred up your newspapers, you want to shred them up. Other things, if you use cardboard boxes, make sure that they're non-coated, just a regular non-coated cardboard box, but also make sure they're free of any shipping tape or things like that, because those won't break down. And also make sure that you shred them. If you can mow them up, or if you can break them up, anytime you can increase the surface area, it's going to cause it to break down faster. And those are really all the things that you want to compost and not compost and be careful of in the with the compost pile. I know that this was a pretty I felt like I was kind of speeding through all these points, but there's a lot to talk about with do's and don'ts to composting. And so we will have future episodes on composting, because I know a lot of you want to get into it, and it's certainly a great way to save a lot of money in your garden and produce free fertilizer for your plants. So as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. If you have any questions, post them in the comments box below. Remember to like and subscribe, that helps spread these videos around. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home, and we'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.